The wind howled through the narrow alleys of the poor colony, carrying dust and cold with it. The sky was dark, heavy with storm clouds, and every corner seemed to shiver under the weight of the night. In the middle of that storm, Ethan walked home slowly, his boots sinking into the muddy ground. His hands were rough from the mines, his body tired from another long day, and all he wanted was to sit by the small fire in his hut and eat the little food he had left. Life for him was hard but simple, and he had learned not to expect anything more than survival. As he reached the wooden steps of his small hut, he stopped. There was a faint sound near the trash bins at the side of the street. At first, he thought it was just an animal searching for scraps, but then he heard whispers, soft, desperate voices that trembled with hunger. He turned his head and saw them. Two small figures crouched close together, thin and shaking from the cold. Their skin was pale with a strange bluish glow, their hair tangled, and their clothes little more than torn rags. They were alien children, no more than 10 or 11 years old, their faces hollow from days without food. The older one held her sister tightly, trying to share her body warmth. The younger one's hands trembled as she reached into the trash, pulling out a piece of moldy bread. She tried to bite it, but the smell was so bad that she gagged and dropped it. Ethan felt something twist inside his chest. He had seen suffering before, but there was something about these two girls that struck him harder than he expected. Perhaps it was the way the older one tried to act brave. Even though her eyes were full of tears, she refused to let fall. Or maybe it was the way the younger one, too weak to stand properly, still clung to her sister's hand like it was the only thing keeping her alive. People passed by on the street. Some threw disgusted looks, others laughed cruelly, and some pretended not to see. In this colony, alien orphans were treated like dirt, worse than stray animals. No one wanted to help them because they were not human, and helping them meant wasting food that humans themselves barely had. Ethan stood at his door, frozen. He looked at the small loaf of bread and bowl of stew waiting for him inside. It was all he had left for the night, and tomorrow he would need strength for the mines again. He told himself he should go inside and close the door. It was not his problem. But when he saw the younger girl stumble, her knees giving way as she collapsed in the dirt, his heart made the choice before his mind could. He rushed forward, his boots splashing in the mud, and bent down to lift the little one into his arms. She was frighteningly light, as if her bones had no weight at all. Her skin was cold, her breath weak. The older sister gasped and tried to pull her away, but Ethan raised a hand gently. "It's all right," he said softly. "Come with me." His voice was calm, not threatening, and for a moment the girl hesitated. Then, holding her sister's hand tightly, she followed him inside the hut. The warmth of the small fire greeted them. Ethan placed the younger one carefully on a blanket in the corner and hurried to the table. He pulled out the bread and stew. His stomach growled painfully when he smelled the food, but he pushed the hunger aside and set the meal in front of the girls. "Eat," he said simply. At first, they stared at him in disbelief, their large eyes blinking as if they didn't trust what was happening. The older one looked at him suspiciously, as though expecting a trick, but the younger girl was too weak to resist. She reached out with trembling hands, broke a piece of bread, and put it in her mouth. The moment the taste touched her tongue, tears spilled down her cheeks. She ate quickly, almost choking, and the older one soon followed, grabbing the stew and feeding her sister with shaky hands. They ate like children who hadn't tasted real food in weeks, every bite desperate, every swallow a fight against their hunger. Ethan sat quietly, watching them. His stomach ached, but there was a strange peace in his chest. For the first time in many years, he felt he had done something that mattered. The room was filled with the sound of chewing, slurping, and the soft, muffled sobs of the girls as they ate. The older one finally slowed down, her hands trembling as she held the bowl close. She whispered something in her alien tongue, a word Ethan didn't understand, but the way she looked at him made him realize it was a word of thanks. They finished the food quickly, leaving not a drop behind. Ethan smiled faintly and leaned back against the wall. He told them they could rest, but when he turned to check again a few minutes later, they were already asleep. The younger one curled up in her sister's arms, both of them breathing softly, their faces peaceful for the first time. He pulled a spare blanket over them and sat by the fire, staring into the flames. When the first light of dawn touched the window, Ethan stirred awake from his chair. The hut was quiet. He turned toward the corner, but the blanket was empty. The girls were gone. He stood quickly, searching, but there was no sign of them. Only one thing remained. On the table where the food had been, there was a small carved stone, smooth and glowing faintly. He picked it up, confused. The markings on it were strange, like a family crest or a royal seal, but he could not read it. He held it in his hand for a long moment, then sighed and set it on the shelf. He never saw the girls again. As the years passed, the memory faded into the quiet corners of his mind, like a small kindness he had once done and forgotten. But 10 years later, on another stormy night, thunder roared across the colony, and the ground shook as a massive shadow fell over his hut. He rushed outside and looked up, his eyes wide. A luxury spaceship, shining with silver light and royal banners, hovered directly above his roof. And his life, once so simple, would never be the same again. The sound was like thunder, but sharper, heavier, as if the sky itself was tearing apart. Ethan stumbled out of his hut, his heart pounding in his chest. The ground shook beneath his feet, and dust fell from the roofs of the poor wooden houses around him. When he looked up, his mouth fell open. Hovering above the colony was something no miner, no farmer, no ordinary man had ever seen before. A luxury spaceship, larger than the governor's entire palace and shining with blinding silver light. Its engines hummed like an ocean storm, and strange glowing symbols crawled across its hull. It looked like a floating palace in the sky, something that belonged to the stars, not to a poor colony filled with broken huts. People poured out of their homes. Children screamed and pointed. Old men fell to their knees in fear, and women covered their mouths with trembling hands. The colony had only ever seen warships of the lower class, used to patrol or threaten. But this ship was no common vessel. Everyone whispered the same thing. Only nobility, only royal blood could afford such a craft. Its presence alone was enough to silence the entire district. Slowly, with a hiss of steam and a deep groan of engines, the ship descended. The air whipped around violently, tearing roofs, throwing dust, and shaking every wall. Ethan had to shield his face from the gale. The ship's landing gear struck the earth right in front of his hut, making the ground split and tremble. The sheer size of it blocked out half the sky, casting his little home in deep shadow. The villagers watched in awe and confusion, whispering loudly, "Who are they here for? The governor? A rich trader? Maybe a warlord?" Nobody dared to believe what the truth was. Soldiers emerged first, stepping down from a ramp that extended like a silver tongue. They were tall, armored in radiant suits that shone like mirrors, and carried weapons that looked as though they could burn an entire block to ash with one pull of the trigger. Their eyes scanned the crowd, cold and sharp, but then something strange happened. Instead of spreading through the village, instead of moving toward the governor's house on the hill, the line of soldiers turned in one direction only. They walked toward Ethan. Gasps and murmurs broke out. People grabbed each other's arms in shock, their voices racing. No, that cannot be right. It must be a mistake. Why would they go to him? He's just a miner. Yet the soldiers marched forward without hesitation. Ethan stood frozen. His hut was nothing more than patched wood and stone, so small it looked like a child's toy compared to the shining ship. He took a step back, his chest tight with fear. He thought they were here to arrest him, or worse, to punish him for something he did not even understand. But then the soldiers did the unthinkable. They stopped in front of him and, in perfect unison, lowered their weapons and bent to one knee. Their shining heads bowed toward the ground, as if he were someone of the highest rank. The crowd erupted in shock. No one in the colony had ever seen royal soldiers bow to anyone except their own rulers. Ethan looked down at them, speechless, his heart racing faster than ever. He wanted to shout at them that they had the wrong man, that he was no one. But before he could speak, the ramp of the ship shifted again, and a second wave of figures emerged. 2 women stepped out, tall, graceful, and dressed in robes of flowing silk woven with silver threads. Their hair gleamed under the ship's lights, their skin carried a soft glow, and jewels sparkled on their necks and wrists. They moved with elegance, each step measured, each glance powerful. Every villager fell silent as they walked down the ramp, because it was clear these were no ordinary nobles. They carried themselves with the authority of bloodlines older than empires. Ethan's throat tightened. His eyes locked on their faces, and something inside him stirred. He knew them. Somehow, impossibly, he knew them. His mind scrambled back through the years, through the dust of memory, until it landed on one night long ago, a cold night. Two shivering girls in rags, a bowl of stew and bread. Their faces had been thin, weak, desperate. But now they stood before him transformed, radiant, alive, powerful. The older one's eyes met his. They were the same eyes, though now sharper, filled with strength. The younger one smiled faintly, the same soft smile he had seen before she fell asleep on his blanket. 10 years had changed them from starving orphans to royal figures of power, but Ethan's heart told him the truth immediately. These were the same two children he had once saved. The villagers did not know this. They only saw noble women stepping before a poor miner. They pressed forward, whispering frantically, "Why them? Why here? Do they know him? This makes no sense." But when the two women stopped right in front of Ethan, silence fell again like a heavy curtain. The older one raised her hand, and the soldiers lowered their heads even further. She looked straight into Ethan's eyes, and her voice rang out clearly, carrying across the entire colony. "We have come," she said, "for you." Gasps echoed across the crowd. Some laughed in disbelief, others cried out in confusion, and many simply stared in awe. Ethan could barely breathe. For him, this made no sense at all. He was just a miner with broken boots, a man who lived day to day. Why would a ship like this, women like them, an army like that, why would they come for him? The younger sister stepped closer, her voice softer but trembling with emotion. "Do you not remember us?" she asked. "A cold night, a warm meal. You gave us life when no one else would." Her words cut through him like a blade of memory, and his knees almost gave way. The carved stone on his shelf, the one they had left behind all those years ago, flashed across his mind. He finally understood. The two women bowed their heads before him, their silks brushing against the dirt of the colony floor, and together they spoke, their voices carrying like a song through the stunned silence. "We have returned to honor the debt. We have returned for you." The crowd could not believe their eyes. A poor miner standing before a royal ship with alien nobles bowing to him. Ethan himself could hardly believe it, but the truth was undeniable. The orphans he had once fed had come back, and the world he thought he knew was about to change forever. The silence after their words felt heavier than the spaceship itself. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the two women who now carried themselves like queens, though in his memory they were still those starving little girls with hollow eyes. His heart raced. The villagers around him whispered in shock, but none of them dared step closer. The soldiers kept their weapons lowered but ready, guarding the women with sharp eyes, while the women themselves never looked away from Ethan. The older sister straightened first. Her gaze was steady, powerful, the kind of look that made even the soldiers around her seem small. "We are not strangers," she said firmly. "We are the ones you saved on that night long ago." Ethan blinked, his mouth dry. He shook his head slowly, almost unable to believe. "You, the girls?" His voice cracked. "That was 10 years ago. You can't be." But the younger sister smiled softly, and for a moment he saw the same fragile girl he had once carried into his hut. "We were children then," she said gently. "Weak, abandoned, nothing but shadows. But you gave us warmth, and you gave us food. You saved us." Ethan's mind spun as memories rushed back. The cold night, the way they ate with tears streaming down their faces, the carved stone they had left behind. He had never understood its meaning, had never thought he would see them again. Yet here they were, standing in silks and jewels, with a ship that made the colony tremble at their presence. The crowd stirred with confusion. Some shouted questions, others demanded answers. "What does this mean? Why are they here for him? He's no one." But the older sister raised her hand, and the noise died instantly. Even the wind seemed to pause. "Our true names would have meant nothing to you then," she continued. "But now you must know. We are daughters of the house of Serath, once betrayed and hunted. Our family was struck down in a cruel struggle for power, and we were left to die as children. That night, we would have starved if not for you. By your kindness, we lived." Gasps spread through the villagers. House of Serath was a name that even the poorest had heard whispered. a noble house of immense power, thought to be destroyed long ago in bloody conflict. That such bloodline survived, hidden in two orphan girls, was beyond imagination. The younger one stepped closer, her eyes soft but her voice steady. You think you gave us nothing more than food. But in our world, a life saved is not forgotten. In our culture, a life debt binds stronger than chains. We are bound to you, Ethan, forever. Ethan staggered back a step. His hands shook. No, he whispered. I did what anyone should have done. It wasn't worth all this. The older sister's eyes hardened. No one else did, she said sharply. We begged. We suffered. They turned away, spat at us, laughed while we starved. But you, when you had nothing yourself, you gave us everything you had. Do not call it small. To us, it was life. Ethan felt the weight of her words press down on him. Around him, the villagers looked at him with new eyes. The same people who once ignored him, who saw him as just another poor miner, now stared at him as if he were something more. Some faces carried envy, others disbelief, and a few even fear. The younger sister reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as if emotion still pulled at her. 10 years have passed. We have taken back what was stolen from us. Our house is restored, our fleets answer to us, and our enemies bow or flee. And now we have returned for you, because the law of our people demands it. Ethan swallowed hard. What law? He asked. The elder one's voice dropped, heavy with meaning. The law of blood debt. When one saves the life of noble blood, the bloodline itself is tied to that savior. It is not a choice. It is eternal. Everything we are, everything we command, belongs also to you. The words struck him harder than any weapon. He looked at the shining ship, the soldiers bowing, the silks and jewels, and then down at his own rough hands covered in the scars of mining tools. It felt wrong, impossible. He had shared a meal with two starving children, and now he stood as the master of wealth and power beyond anything he could dream. But then came the part that unsettled him most. The younger one's voice softened, almost a whisper, but the words reached his ears clearly. It also means, she said carefully, that you belong to us now. Ethan's breath caught. The crowd erupted again in gasps and whispers, shocked at the meaning behind her words. Some even laughed nervously, thinking it a joke, but Ethan saw the seriousness in their eyes. The bond was not just about reward, it was about unity, about tying their lives together until death. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His chest felt tight, his thoughts heavy. He wanted to argue, to refuse, to tell them he was not worthy. But deep inside, a memory echoed, their thin hands shaking as they ate the bread, the tears running down their cheeks, the way they had slept peacefully for the first time in his hut. The older sister placed her hand on her heart, bowing her head slightly. You may not understand now, but soon you will. You are no longer just a miner. You are savior of Serath blood, and the galaxy will know your name. Ethan stood frozen, the weight of their words sinking deeper and deeper. The villagers watched in silence, stunned by the impossible truth. Above them, the massive ship loomed like a shadow of destiny, waiting to carry him into a future he could not yet imagine. And though he wanted to deny it, though he wanted to step back into the life he knew, part of him already understood. His world had changed forever the moment he fed two orphan girls a warm meal. Inside the great ship, Ethan felt like he had stepped into another world. The floor shone like polished glass, reflecting the light of glowing crystals that floated in the air. The walls were covered in strange symbols and living vines of silver metal that pulsed as though alive. The poor miner's boots left faint marks of dust on the perfect floor, and he felt out of place with every step. Soldiers followed behind silently, but their eyes were not on him. They were fixed in respect, waiting for orders from the two sisters who walked gracefully at his side. They led him through wide halls filled with wonders he could not name. In one room, he saw piles of treasures, golden coins, crystal shards, and glowing spheres that seemed to hum with energy. In another, he saw technology so advanced it looked like magic. Chairs that floated without touch, screens showing distant galaxies, weapons locked in glass that could burn holes in mountains. Ethan had spent his life in the mines, breaking rocks for scraps. Yet here he walked among riches greater than he ever thought possible. The sisters stopped before a grand chamber. Its doors opened on their own, revealing a throne carved from black stone that shimmered with stars. Around it, banners of deep purple hung, marked with the crest of their noble house. The older sister motioned for Ethan to step forward. He hesitated, but her eyes told him she would not take no for an answer. Slowly, he walked to the throne, his rough hands brushing against the cold stone as he stood beside it. The elder sister's voice echoed in the chamber. "This is the seat of Serath, once taken from us, now reclaimed, and by the law of our blood, it belongs also to you." Ethan shook his head quickly. "No, this is not for me. I'm no king, no noble. I am just a miner. I work with stone and dust, not thrones." The younger sister stepped closer, her eyes softer than her sister's, though her words carried equal weight. "Do you think you can deny what has already been written in blood? Our law is not a choice. It binds. You saved our lives. That bond cannot be broken. To you, it was a meal. To us, it was survival. To our people, it means you are forever part of our bloodline." Ethan rubbed his forehead, trying to make sense of it. "But why me? You could have chosen anyone now that you have power. You could command armies, buy kings, rule worlds. Why chain yourself to a man who has nothing?" The elder sister's eyes hardened, like blades flashing under light. "Because no one else did what you did. When we were nothing, when we were filth in the mud, you, who had nothing, gave us something. Do you understand? That act is greater than wealth. It is greater than power. You proved what kind of man you are, and our people honor that above all else." Ethan's heart pounded. He wanted to argue again, but the younger sister's next words silenced him. "And it is not only about honor. Our law demands balance, life for life, riches for bread, safety for shelter. We owe you more than we can ever repay, and so we must give all that we have. Our ships, our lands, even ourselves." Ethan's breath caught at the weight of her words. The chamber seemed colder. He looked between them, unsure if he had heard right. "Yourselves?" he asked quietly. The younger one lowered her eyes, her cheeks flushing faintly, while the elder sister's face remained calm, though her voice carried steel. "Yes. By our culture's law, our lives are bound to you. We are tied until death. Your fate is ours, your safety above ours. It is not a gift, it is a duty." Ethan took a shaky step back. His chest felt heavy, and for a moment he could not speak. The thought of being bound to them, of carrying such weight, was overwhelming. He wanted to run, to return to the simple life where his only worry was the mines. But deep inside, a voice whispered that he could never go back. The moment they had landed outside his hut, the path of his life had already shifted. The elder sister's expression softened slightly, though her tone stayed firm. "You do not need to rule. You do not need to wear a crown. But know this, Ethan. Whether you want it or not, you are now part of us, and the galaxy will see you not as a miner, but as savior of Serath." The younger sister stepped closer, almost pleading now. "Please, do not think of it as chains. Think of it as a bond. You gave when no one else would. Let us give back now. Let us protect you, raise you higher than you ever thought possible. You do not have to carry it alone. We are here with you." Ethan's mind was a storm. He looked at the throne again, the symbol of power, and then down at his hands. They were calloused, scarred, dirty. Hands of a worker, not a leader. Yet those same hands had once carried a starving child into warmth. Those hands had given life. And now, by laws he did not understand, by a culture he barely knew, those hands were being pulled into a destiny larger than anything he had dreamed. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the living walls. Finally, Ethan whispered, almost to himself, "I don't know if I can be what you think I am." The elder sister answered firmly, her eyes locked onto his. "Then become it." The younger one added softly, her voice trembling but filled with hope. "You already were, that night." Ethan stood between them, caught between the weight of their law and the memory of a single act of kindness. His heart was heavy, but in that moment he realized the truth. Whether he accepted it or not, his life was no longer his alone. And though fear gripped him, another feeling stirred beneath it, something he had not felt in years. A sense that maybe, just maybe, he was meant for more than dust and stone. The days after Ethan entered the ship passed in a blur. He had barely begun to understand what the sisters meant about being bound to him when danger arrived without warning. It started with whispers from the soldiers, sharp orders echoing down the halls, and alarms glowing red along the walls. Ethan had never seen technology like it before, but even without words, he could feel what was happening. An enemy was near. From the wide windows of the ship, he saw shadows moving across the sky. Smaller vessels, dark and armed, circled like wolves around prey. The soldiers rushed to their stations, their armor glowing, their weapons humming with deadly power. The sisters stood calm, but their faces were hard with anger. Ethan felt his stomach twist as he realized the truth. This attack was not random. The enemies were here for the sisters, and now for him as well. The elder sister turned to him. Her eyes were sharp, commanding, but there was no fear in them. This is what we warned you of. Our enemies will not stop. They know our law binds us to you, and they will try to break that bond by killing you. If you fall, so does our honor. The younger one stepped forward quickly, her voice trembling but urgent. Stay close to us, please. They will not harm you as long as we stand. But even as she said it, the ship shuddered. Explosions echoed outside. One of the enemy crafts had fired, shaking the hull with fire and smoke. Ethan stumbled, clutching a railing to stay upright. His heart raced. He had seen fights in the mines, he had seen drunks brawling in the streets, but he had never seen a war up close. The power outside was terrifying, and it was coming straight for them. Then a soldier ran in, his voice urgent. The colony is under attack. The enemy troops have landed. They are striking the poor district first. Ethan froze. His mind flashed to his small hut, the streets he had walked every day, the people he had known all his life. Whatever the colony had thought of him before, it was still his home. Now it was burning under the fire of soldiers who wanted his death. He turned to the sisters, his voice rough. You have to stop them. They'll kill everyone down there. The elder sister's voice was calm but heavy. Our duty is to protect you first. If they fall, it is tragedy. But if you fall, our law and our lives are broken. Her words struck him like a blade. Protect him? At the cost of every innocent life in his colony? He shook his head, his fists tightening. No, I won't let them die because of me. The sisters exchanged a glance. The younger one whispered, What are you saying? Ethan's chest heaved as he looked toward the view of the burning colony below. He saw fire spreading, heard faint screams even through the ship's walls. Something inside him shifted, something that had slept for years in the mines. He was not a soldier, not a noble, not a leader, but he could not stand by and let people die. Not when the danger was because of him. He turned, grabbing the nearest weapon from a rack on the wall. It was heavier than he expected, glowing with alien energy, but he held it with both hands. The soldiers around him stared, shocked, but Ethan's eyes were set. I'm going down there, he said firmly. The elder sister's voice sharpened like steel. You are not trained. You will be killed. Maybe, Ethan replied, his voice low. But I won't hide while my people are slaughtered. I won't let my home burn just so I can stay safe. If your law says my life matters, then it matters because of what I do with it, not because I hide. The younger sister's breath caught. She looked at him with wide eyes, her lips trembling. For a moment, Ethan thought she might cry. But instead, she stepped forward, placing her hand gently on the weapon he held. Then we will go with you. If you fight, we fight. We are bound to you. The elder one hesitated. Her jaw tightened, but at last she nodded. So be it. If this is the trial, then we face it together. The ramp of the ship lowered, and the storm of smoke and fire rushed in. Ethan stepped out first, the weapon heavy in his hands, the heat of burning homes hitting his face. Around him, villagers screamed and ran, chased by enemy soldiers in dark armor. The sisters followed behind, their robes replaced with light armor that gleamed under the firelight, their eyes burning with fury. An enemy soldier raised his weapon at a fleeing child, and without thinking, Ethan raised his own. The blast of energy kicked against his chest, throwing light across the street. The enemy fell, smoke rising from his armor. Ethan's heart pounded in shock. He had never killed before. But when he saw the child run free, he understood he had no choice. More enemies came, and Ethan fought, each strike fueled not by skill, but by raw determination. He stumbled, he fell, but he always rose again. The villagers, once watching in disbelief, began to rally. Men grabbed stones, women picked up sticks and tools, and together they struck at the invaders. Ethan's courage lit something in them. For the first time, they did not run, they fought. The sisters fought beside him, their blades flashing, their movements sharp and deadly. They shielded him when the fire grew too close, but he also shielded them, throwing himself between them and danger more than once. The battle stretched long into the night, fire and screams filling the air, until finally the enemy began to retreat. Their ships pulled back, their soldiers fleeing into the smoke. When silence finally fell, Ethan stood in the ruins of the colony, his chest heaving, his hands trembling from exhaustion. Around him, villagers stared with wide eyes. The same people who once mocked him now looked at him with awe. A miner, a nobody, had stood against an army and lived. The younger sister touched his arm softly, her voice quiet but filled with pride. "You have done more than you know. Tonight, you are not just a miner, you are protector of two worlds." Ethan looked around at the broken homes, the people clutching each other, and the fires still burning. His chest ached with sorrow and pride both. He knew life would never be simple again, but he also knew he would never turn back. The journey to the alien homeworld was unlike anything Ethan had ever imagined. From the windows of the great ship, he watched as stars stretched into lines, the universe itself bending while they moved faster than light. He had never left his colony before, never even dreamed of seeing other planets, and now he was heading toward the very heart of an empire. His rough miner's hands gripped the edges of the chair as though holding himself steady against a world too big to believe. The sisters sat near him, calm and graceful, though he could see something fierce in their eyes. They had fought by his side in the colony, had seen him stand when others fled, and they carried themselves with new pride. But their calmness was a mask too. Ethan could feel it. What awaited them on their world was not only a return home, but a test. When the ship descended through thick clouds, Ethan gasped. The alien city spread out below like a sea of light. Towers of crystal and steel reached into the sky. Glowing veins of energy ran along streets like rivers, and flying crafts swarmed in organized patterns above the skyline. It was a place of wealth and power beyond anything he could compare to his small mining colony. The ship landed softly on a vast platform, guarded by soldiers in silver armor and surrounded by nobles in robes of every color. The moment Ethan stepped out, the whispers began. Thousands of eyes fixed on him. He felt their stares, some curious, some disgusted, many filled with disbelief. To them, he was a human, a lesser being, a man from the dirt mines, with rough clothes and scars on his hands. Yet he walked beside the daughters of Sereth, noble women who carried the weight of an ancient name. The contrast made the nobles murmur louder, their voices dripping with mockery. "Is this the one?" a man sneered. "A miner? They bind themselves to this? It is a disgrace to our traditions." Ethan felt heat rise to his face, but before he could speak, the elder sister raised her hand, her voice cutting through the crowd like a blade. "Silence. You will not question the law of our people. He is our savior. His act binds him to us, and through us, to Sereth itself." The murmurs dimmed, but not all were silenced. Many nobles still sneered, their eyes sharp with hatred. Ethan could see clearly. Though the sisters spoke with power, they were surrounded by enemies in their own land. Inside the great council hall, the feeling was even heavier. The chamber was vast, shaped like a circle with thrones of stone and silver surrounding the center. Each seat held a noble lord or lady, their robes marked with crests of their houses. At the highest seat sat the High Chancellor, his eyes narrow and cruel as he watched Ethan walk in. The elder sister stood tall, her voice ringing with authority. She told the story of the night Ethan had saved them, of the bond of law, and of the battle at the colony where Ethan had stood against enemies who wished to see their bloodline fall. Her words were strong, her tone proud, and the younger sister added her own voice, softer, but filled with emotion. Together, they painted a picture of Ethan not as a miner, but as a protector chosen by fate. But when they finished, laughter broke from one corner of the hall. A noble lord leaned forward, his eyes full of scorn. "So you bring us a human, filthy from the mines, and demand we honor him as part of Sereth bloodline? You would insult us all for the sake of a debt?" Others joined in, voices harsh. "It is madness. The law was not meant for lesser creatures. They twist tradition to shame us." Ethan clenched his fists, shame and anger burning inside him. He wanted to shout that he had not asked for this, that he never wanted their crowns or their fleets. But before he could speak, the elder sister slammed her staff against the floor. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. "The law is older than your houses, older than your wealth. It binds us all. If you mock him, you mock the law. If you spit on him, you spit on our honor. We will not bend." The hall fell silent, though the anger in the noble's eyes did not fade. The High Chancellor leaned forward at last, his voice smooth and dangerous. "Very well. If the law binds, then we cannot deny it. But let us test him. If he is truly bound to you, let him prove himself worthy in deed, not just in story." Ethan's stomach sank. He could feel the trap in those words. It was not enough for them that he had once fed 2 starving girls. It was not enough that he had fought at the colony. These nobles wanted him to fail, to break, to show that a human had no place among them. The younger sister placed her hand gently on his arm. Her eyes were worried, but her voice was steady. "Do not fear. You have already proven yourself to us. Whatever trial they give, we will face it together." The elder one nodded firmly. "You do not stand alone. Remember that." Ethan looked around the hall, at the sneering nobles, at the flashing eyes of hatred and envy, and at the 2 sisters standing beside him like unshakable pillars. He felt the weight of their law pressing on his shoulders, but also the memory of the people he had saved. The children who had run free when he lifted his weapon, the miners who had stood behind him when he refused to bow. He straightened slowly, lifting his head, and spoke for the first time in the chamber. His voice was rough but steady. "I never asked for your crowns, your wealth, or your titles. I don't care for them, but I will not run from what I started. If you want me to prove myself, I will, not for you, but for them, for the ones who believe I can." The chamber rippled with murmurs again, but this time they were quieter, more uncertain. Ethan had no armor of silk, no crown of jewels, no army at his command. All he had were his scarred hands and his unshaken will. Yet in that moment, it was enough to make even the proud nobles hesitate. The High Chancellor's lips curved into a thin smile. "Then let the trial be set. Let the galaxy see whether a human can stand as more than dust." Ethan's heart pounded, but he did not step back. He stood between the sisters, caught in the eyes of a hostile empire, knowing the road ahead would test him more than ever. Yet for the first time, he did not feel small. He felt ready. 10 years passed like a long breath, drawn and released. But for Ethan, the memory of that night in the colony never faded. The trial he had faced before the nobles, the battles he had fought beside the sisters, the weight of the law that bound him to them, all of it shaped his life into something he never expected. He was no longer a miner, no longer just a man of dust and stone. He was the guardian of the bloodline, and his name carried across worlds. The colony where he once lived in poverty had changed beyond recognition. Where broken huts and muddy streets had once stood, there now rose tall structures of stone and light. Energy flowed through glowing lines, clean water ran in shining canals, and children laughed in wide-open courtyards. The people no longer bowed to governors or petty lords who cared nothing for them. They looked to Ethan, the man who had once stood with nothing but a borrowed weapon and refused to let them die. But Ethan himself remained the same at heart. His hands were still scarred, his voice still rough, and his heart still held the simple truth that kindness mattered more than crowns. Though fleets of ships carried his name, though nobles bowed reluctantly when he entered their halls, he never demanded riches or worship. He asked only that his people, human and alien alike, be given safety, food, and dignity. That simple wish, once thought weak, became his strength. The sisters ruled beside him, not above him. The elder sister stood like steel, her voice carrying power across the council chambers, cutting down every insult and every challenge with sharp words and sharper will. The younger sister softened the edges, her kindness turning suspicion into respect, her laughter bringing light into the dark halls of politics. Together, they balanced strength with warmth, and they never let Ethan forget why they had bound themselves to him. They never let him feel alone. Still, enemies never vanished. Whispers rose in hidden corners of the empire, voices angry that a human sat beside noble blood. Some plotted, some threatened, some even tried to strike against him. But each time, the sisters stood at his side, their blades flashing, their armies ready. And each time, Ethan himself stood firm, not because he loved war, but because he refused to be broken. The galaxy soon learned that the poor miner they mocked would not bend, and those who underestimated him often regretted it. Years later, as the sun set over the capital world, Ethan stood on the balcony of the palace. From there, he could see the endless city stretching to the horizon, glowing rivers of light and towers of crystal. The air was filled with the hum of starships coming and going, fleets that now carried banners marked not just with the crest of Serath, but also with his name. The sight should have felt overwhelming, but to him it always circled back to one memory: two starving girls eating bread and stew by a weak fire in his hut. The younger sister joined him on the balcony, her robes whispering softly as she walked. She carried a chalice of crystal, offered it to him, and smiled. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving us that meal, binding yourself to us, stepping into all of this?" Ethan took the cup, his rough hands awkward against the delicate glass. He looked into the sky where stars began to appear, faint but steady. "No," he said softly. "How could I regret saving two children? Everything after, that was not my choice. But that night, that was mine, and I would choose it again." The elder sister stepped out behind them then, her presence commanding as always. She rested her hand on the balcony rail, her eyes scanning the city like a hawk watching its domain. "And that is why you became more than any noble, Ethan. They cling to power because they fear losing it. You hold it only because you do not want it." He chuckled quietly, shaking his head. "Sometimes I still feel like a minor pretending to be more." The younger sister laughed softly, her eyes warm. "And sometimes we still feel like starving girls who never left that night behind. But here we are, together still." The three of them stood in silence, the sounds of the city echoing below. For Ethan, it was strange and comforting both. He had never dreamed of palaces or fleets, yet life had carried him here. And though he carried the weight of armies and bloodlines, he knew he was not alone. Later that night, when the city was quiet, Ethan walked to the private garden built within the palace walls. It was small compared to the grandeur of everything else, but it reminded him of home. Stones, dirt, and a little patch of wild grass had been brought from his old colony, placed there so he could touch what he once knew. On a shelf beside the garden, under protective glass, rested a small carved stone, the same one the sisters had left in his hut all those years ago. He picked it up carefully, turning it in his hands. Its glow had not faded with time. He whispered to himself, his voice low. All this because of one warm meal. The wind stirred the trees in the garden. Above, the night sky burned with light as ships moved through orbit, carrying his name, carrying the crest of Serath, carrying the story of a man who had once been nothing. But to two orphan girls, he had been everything. And through them, through the bond of law and the strength of choice, he had become something the galaxy would never forget. The palace bells rang in the distance, marking the hour. Ethan placed the stone back on the shelf, his hand lingering on it for a moment. Then he turned toward the palace doors where the sisters waited, their silhouettes lit by warm light. He walked toward them slowly, his steps steady, and in his heart, he carried the truth that had guided him through every battle, every trial, every throne. Kindness had made him powerful. Kindness had built an empire. And kindness given freely on one cold night had bound his name to the stars forever.